session by filling it out, and at the end of the session we will gather this paper. We will draw out the paper and winner for a book. And before we start, let's introduce ourselves. I'm Mustafa Fajalu. I'm from Science Ed.
I'm Mark Malani from Physiology.
I'm Marcel Siegel from Science Ed and Biochem. I'm Sarah Humfeld in the School of Natural Resources.
I'm in School of Biology.
Sarah Bush in Biology.
Sarah Shell in Chemistry. And Lawson in Chemistry. I'm Daniel Finn in Rural Psychology, but I'm in School of Teaching and Frank Schmidt, Biochem.
Greg Lewis, Biochem.
David Kink, Digger. Alice Myers, there. Just came to Kivitz. Yep.
Heckle.
And I'm Julie Burke, Science Ed, and we'll get to that.
Steve Keller from Chemistry.
Three girls that are doing medicine.
Great. So welcome all to this, our second ABLE Conversations of the year. Mark on your calendars, November 8th is our next one. And then I'd like to present Dr. Aaron Krawitz from Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering. He's going to talk about engineering for non-engineers.
Thank you all. If diversity is a good thing, this audience is a prime example of good diversity. I sent informational copies of my talk to two people. One was Marcel, and one was someone else off campus. I wasn't asking for advice, you see, but the first one wrote back and said, you have too many slides and you should have handouts. And the second one said, you have too many slides and you should have handouts. So I met them halfway. I have handouts of a couple of the slides. But I use slides kind of impressionistically, and I always have too many slides. So you could be the judge. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about this subject, which in fact is an interesting and serious subject. I got involved in this through conversations with a woman named Sheila Tobias 4 or 5 years ago. These culminated in a workshop at the recent American Society for Engineering Education conference on introducing engineering to non-engineering students, And I don't know if you're familiar with Sheila Tobias. She's a very interesting woman. She's published extensively, particularly on math anxiety for women, on trying to convince more students that science is something that they can do and that they should be interested in. And she was instrumental in starting what's called the Professional Science Masters with support from the Sloan Foundation, and there are now 300 of these programs around the country. This is for people, for example, journalism students or business students who want to go in to work for technical companies and want to know something about science thinking without being science majors. And apparently it's been a big success. The issue that I'm talking about is I read a lot of reports while I read a lot of reports and trying to decide how to go about this. This is from one from the National Academy of Engineering and National Research Council. And I know you're not supposed to read slides, but this is the only thing that probably bears emphasizing. The idea that all Americans should be better prepared to navigate our highly technological world has been advocated by many individuals and groups for years. Nevertheless, the issue of technological literacy is virtually invisible on the national agenda. This was written about 15 years ago. I think it's still basically true today. I thought I was the first one who thought of this. It turns out that was wrong. There have been a number of organized efforts to deal with this. One of the interesting ones is the first one here, the New Liberal Arts Program. The Sloan Foundation in the late 70s realized with the advent of the modern tech companies, Apple, Microsoft, with the advent of modems and Ethernet and so on, that liberal arts students, and also with the advent of quantitative methodology in the humanities, that liberal arts students should be exposed to technological ideas. And that was the thrust of these meetings that went on, for a number of years. Technically speaking, which is, I need to use my notes here, is the National Academy of Engineering was involved in, that's the quote I read before. Standards for Technological Literacy. This is a group of that has developed course content for K through 12 that's age appropriate, dealing with technical ideas as they move, from primary through high school. It's very interesting. The National Academy of Engineering has been interested in it, and finally I'll mention that the American Society for Engineering Education has 2 technical divisions that deal with these kinds of ideas, and you can see them here. And finally then the workshop that I alluded to earlier. Let me define some terms very briefly to kind of set the stage. And these are from a report. There's many ways to say these, but science being an understanding of the natural world, engineering being the creation of new technologies to improve the human condition, the human welfare. I prefer to think of engineering as science applied to society. All engineering products or projects, dams, computers, automobiles, airplanes, these are things that scientific principles have been used to create products that people use. And as we know, these products, it turns out, have huge influence on the world that we live in. Okay, let me make 2 more distinctions. First, engineering literacy, which is the process of being an engineer, designing, the designing mentality, how you create technological products, how you apply science to products. That is not what this is about. What this is about is understanding for the non-engineer how products work, the core scientific ideas that they incorporate, and the relation of those products to the world that they live in. That's what we're talking about here. I'm going to cite 4 different institutions that have examples of how leadership has led to some very innovative courses and programs. And I'll briefly run through these. One is at Princeton, a pioneering, and I'll show you these in more detail in a moment. A pioneering course was started that's extremely popular to this day at Princeton. University of Maryland College Park has completely revamped their Gen Ed program with a whole slew of courses that are germane to what I'm talking about. And Stony Brook has done the same thing in a somewhat different way. There's been huge buy-in. Finally, I want to show you an example from the University of Delaware of a course that was designed to be an honors course. It's also a writing course, it turns out. So the courses that you'll be seeing a few dozen course titles as I go through this, can be grouped into two divisions. One is overview course, engineering in the modern world kind of thing, and the other are topical courses, biomedical engineering, material science, in the world and this kind of thing. And it'll be fairly self-evident. So in the 80s, a faculty member, David Billington, introduced a work that focused on great engineering projects, started from the mid-19th century in the U.S. He also talked about the men who and women, although I think it was all men, actually, as I think about the list that I'm going to show you, that were behind these things. And he did it from these three perspectives that you see here. And let me show you what the course was called, Engineering in the Modern World. And it was, the outline looked like this. And this went, I say, from the mid-19th century forward, independence referring to steel bridges, iron bridges, and steam engines and steamboats, connecting referring to railroads, steel making and the telegraph, the rise of the great American industries referring to power, electric light, Edison and Westinghouse, the telephone, Bell, oil, Rockefeller, Ford with the auto, and the Wright brothers with the planes. Regional refers to projects like the Hoover Dam and the Tennessee Valley Authority. This course, Billington has retired. This course is now taught by others. And this shows the kind of, both liberal arts and STEM students could take this particular course. The syllabus was somewhat adjusted for each. These courses are that are taken by non-STEM students. Typically, they have a college algebra background. That's all they need. They don't do problems. They do a lot of writing about things based on readings that are assigned. There's a second course now started by a woman named Maria Garlock who shows many examples, particularly of bridges that are modern bridges, which have an artistic view to them. She showed us a beautiful DVD slideshow movie about these products and modern skyscraper architecture. She's a civil engineer. Maryland College Park, at the instigation of the provost there, felt that professional schools should be involved in general education. And he got a group of faculty that met in sessions not unlike this one. They came up with a number of courses they called marquee courses. I show you three examples here. They gave development money to departments. They established learning communities. And this led to a 3-year project, which was lightning fast in academic terms, to reconfigure their general education programs. And they came up with a set of what they call I courses, I representing innovative or imaginative. And there's a faculty learning committee, community that meets to this day, and the professional schools were required to contribute courses. Here's a listing of, as of a few years ago, I-series courses. And I'll elaborate a little bit on the red one here because it's in my field. But you see they tend to have catchy titles. And these are courses that are taken by non-engineering students who want to know something about technology, and through which ideas of technology helping to create an informed citizenry can be introduced, and science can be taught. The materials course, I show you the syllabus. Faculty member named Rob Breiber, who was instrumental in this whole program. He had a successful career at NIST, doing neutron and X-ray scattering of polymer conformations. And he then went to Maryland. He's the chair of the Material Science and Engineering Department. He's the Associate Dean of Engineering. He's been very involved in all this process. This looks not unlike an engineering materials course that would be taught anywhere. The content, of course, what he says and how he says it is different. Stony Brook did even more in a sense. They developed they also reformulated their general education. They established a one-course tech requirement. This also was at a leader in this was an associate provost who happened to be chair of a department in the College of Engineering that's called Technology and Society, if you can imagine. There aren't too many of those around. And the College of Engineering felt strongly that they should be involved in general education. They created the Stony Brook curriculum. There are 4 components of it. 2 interest us. One, the first one had 10 different parts. They had to take a certain number of them. One that they had to take was this understanding technology, the tech part, and I'll show you a set of the courses that they took. And another one, you had to take one course in exploring, what they call exploring interconnectedness, the relationship between science and technology and the humanities and social sciences. They called it STAS or STAS, I'm not sure. Then there were 2 more that are interesting but don't concern us here. Here's a listing of the tech courses as of a few years ago. Look at all these. These are from, they use funny initials, but computer science and engineering, material science, the Department of Science and Technology there, mechanical engineering. A vast array of courses designed for non-majors. You know, we don't need to see that. Okay, now here's a set of the courses that deal with the impact of technology on the arts or on humanity. Look at the list of these courses. One of them that I will elaborate on here is this ESG 201, Learning from Disasters. Everybody likes disasters and massive failures. It's the way we are. Here's 4 of them, and this is interesting because it gives you some idea how they approach educationally what they're doing. So they pick the Challenger disaster, and they talk about the concept of the complexity of systems that it takes to build and launch a spacecraft like this, and then they talk about the science of what went wrong there. Now, this is referred to as a design flaw. It really wasn't a design flaw. They knew that if the temperature was below a certain level, that the O-ring seals between the solid-state booster sections would become embrittled. But it was politics that caused them to launch the damn thing. And so there's, as you can imagine, many opportunities then to talk about ethics and other aspects that affect life in a technological world. So these, and there were several, Katrina, Deepwater Horizon, bridge collapse. There's a lot of bridge collapses that you can study. Each had their own particular science associated with it, and that's where the science content came in. University of Delaware, the president there asked Roland Heck, who had been at Princeton and had retired, and had worked with Billington, to come and start a course like that at Delaware. He did it in their honors program, and in their honors program, the freshmen in the honors program were required to take a science-type course and a writing course. So he made this both a science course and a writing course. This course ended in 2014 when Dr. Heck retired again, and no one stepped forward to teach it, and this is an issue that we'll talk about later. He called it Technology in America. He told me that if he had called it Engineering in America, no one would have taken it. So I don't know if that's true or not, but he certainly felt that way. And it had a historical perspective very much like, and I'll show you the syllabus here, very much like the Billington course. And you can see here what he focused on in terms of subject matter. So this syllabus looks very much like Billington's syllabus. This has dates on it, so you can see that it's generally chronological with some overlapping, of course. He gave a lot of reading assignments, and they did a lot of writing. This is the syllabus. Those of you who have been involved in or taken WI courses will see that if this were submitted to the campus writing program, it would be approved in 2 minutes because it basically meets all the qualifications. They did writing. They actually, in this particular course, the writing was critiqued and returned for revision. They had in-class discussions that they had to prepare for. Issues like, is nuclear power now back on the table because as a transitional power source to get rid of fusion, fossil energy as we go to greener things. Should mass transit be? You probably know it's being reintroduced into some cities, etc. You can read this as well as I can. Okay. A fellow named John Krawitz, who's at a small liberal arts college called Hope College, has been a pioneer and a leader within the American Society for Engineering Education, not only in developing a course, but in writing about and organizing sessions. And he wrote a review paper that from which I have lifted this lists of courses. First, topical courses. I want you to get an idea of what's going on nationally. And as of a few years ago, this is what was going on nationally. I just want you to see the titles, the kinds of institutions. They range from small liberal arts schools to the major, to elite privates, to major publics. And some of these things are extremely interesting. This converging technologies is something that there's actually a center for this. This is for interdisciplinary work that Union College is very interested in. Some of them are the kind of how things work approach. Some are very specific. St. Thomas in Minnesota. And I read and wrote on here that the digital information age is one of the most popular courses at Yale. Here's some more. Annapolis does it. University of Denver, Cal State, Northridge. And now some of the overview courses. You can see the variety of titles. The Engines of Our Ingenuity is actually a public radio show now, where they do a little subject thing each show. We don't get it here as far as I know. And at the end of this, there's 3 courses that I want to single out. One is Engineering for Everyone at Smith College. As you know, Smith is a women's college. It's the first women's college, and as far as I know, the only women's college that started an engineering program. They have a bachelor, an undergraduate engineering program. It started, the first graduates left in 2004, 19 women. And they believe strongly that technological literacy, engineering literacy as it's called here, is important for their students. One of the faculty members there and founders of the engineering program is a woman named Donna Riley. Donna recently, this year, moved to Virginia Tech, where she is in the Department of Engineering Education. She started a course there she's teaching now called Citizen Engineering. And it sounded very, very interesting. And then here's the course that Dr. Krawitz teaches at Hope College. It's a small religious school. They started, and it's an ABET accredited engineering program in 1999. It's very interesting. Okay. Let's now come to Missouri, and there's a variety of understandings of our general education. Are there any undergraduates here? Are there any former undergraduates here that have come through? Well, yeah, but you were back in the way back in the covered wagon. The part of general education that I'm interested in, of course, is the tech part, the science part. And you need courses in bioscience, physical science, or math science. It doesn't say engineering, and we can talk about that in a moment. If you were going to add an engineering for non-engineers course, whether it was an overview or a topical, what you would want to do is put it in the physical, in the physical science listings, and if it wasn't considered a physical science, you'd have to modify the rules of Gen Ed. I don't think that would be a big deal. Well, anything can be a big deal on campus politics, but hopefully that wouldn't be too big of a deal. If you wanted to try out a course, the way to do that, in my opinion, would be to offer a course in the Honors College. Steve Keller is here. He's from chemistry. He's a longtime associate director of the Honors College. He would welcome you with open arms, I guarantee you. And the advantage of doing that is small classes, top students, and you don't have to go through the course and curriculum process. Now, whether that would count for the undergrad's distribution, I'm not sure. The point is that you could try out ideas to create in creating a course. If you looked at the lists of courses that I gave you and that are on the handout, and you saw one that kind of resonated with what you would like to do, I think there's a reasonable chance that the teacher of it would share their syllabus and maybe even more course materials with you, thereby reducing the course preparation effort hugely. And I talked to a few people at this meeting, and they all seemed to be, they would be delighted that somebody actually was interested in what they were doing. Okay, for engineering, and there's limited engineering presence here, but I mean this is where it would come out of. Would an engineering course be part of physical science? Well, I said this already. If it isn't, then you'd have to revise the Gen Ed requirement. We have a committee on undergraduate education, which I was on for a few years before I retired, and they would be the ones who would modify this. I don't think it would be a big deal. Would anyone take it? Would anyone teach it? I'm more concerned about would anyone teach it. What are issues in engineering? If I was still an engineering faculty member and I wanted to teach this course, would I get teaching credit as part of my teaching load? That's a question that I don't know the answer to. I once expressed interest in teaching an honors course. This was maybe 20 years ago. And they said, that's fine, but it won't count toward your teaching load. It'll be, you're doing that on your own. That, of course, is not acceptable for this thing to go anywhere. It will take away from your research and publication time. Likely your chairman and your dean, they may not say it exactly, but what they mean is, I'm being judged on your research and your publication. Why are you doing this? Okay. And that's why I tried to emphasize earlier that administrative leadership in this area is terribly important for something like this to get going, and probably explains why there are so few of that. There's about 1,000 engineering programs, I think, in the U.S., and so although you saw a lot of courses, it's a very small percentage. Okay, so I'm a little bit cynical down here, but let's go on. I thought you might be interested. This is somewhat tangential. I'm basically at the end of my prepared remarks. There are, and this started maybe 15 years ago, there are actually 7 that I'm aware of, departments of engineering education that are parts of colleges of engineering today that are concerned professionally with pedagogy, primarily with pedagogy of engineering, the kinds of things that this conversation is most interested in. So there is activity going on I did give you this as a handout. Look it up if you're interested. It's quite impressive. Oops. Okay. This is cut off. This is a Paul Gauguin painting. It's the title that interests me. First, where do we come from? What are we, and where are we going? Those are questions I raise, and that's me in the middle here, imploring heaven for help in going forward. Okay, that concludes my prepared remarks, and I think we're supposed to talk. I was supposed to be interactive. I don't know how to do that. I'm too old. You know, this is something new. So you now have to talk. You have to give me some. What do you think about this? About this notion? If you had been an undergraduate and you had had a technological, engineering in the modern world, would you have taken it instead of astronomy or geology or physics for poets? You know, these are the kind of the big ones that people take. How does this strike you?
I think the topic sounds fascinating. I would have loved to take something like this when I was in undergraduate. The variety of topics.
Do you agree that the idea of a technologically literate citizenry, and particularly college-educated citizenry, is something that a general education format should deal with?
Some of us would settle for literate. But my reaction to this is more about a lot of the literature on science for non-scientists talks about teaching science as a process rather than as a set of facts. And I think it's true. We scientists do think in certain ways and apply certain information in certain ways, and I'm sure that engineers do the same thing. So that I don't know how many of these courses you've cited are process-oriented as opposed to survey-oriented kind of things. And how do you do that? Because ultimately somebody who is a business executive who has to talk to the engineers in her division has to understand how they think. And is there literature and information about that?
Well, I'm not aware explicitly. I mean, Frank, I think the point is that these courses are not teaching, how to be a scientist or how to be an engineer. They're trying to convey something about the ideas of science and how we break things down and understand things without trying to make you into a scientist. I mean, they're trying to do it by focusing on specific technologies that are probably of interest. And that is, I think the idea is that should give some insight into the way scientists or engineers think, and give some guidance when they're thinking about, whether, should we really do something about climate change? Should we really be worried about the use of fossil fuels and the impact of fossil fuels? I mean, some rational basis for discussing it. So these courses do not talk about process as a focus.
So, on that topic, a lot of the overview courses and the topical courses are about the way things work. I would love to see a class for non-engineers on here are how some of the basic things that you just expect to magically appear every day at your house work, like electricity. How do we transmit power across the entire grid, right? How do we get water from point A to point B? Like the real basic stuff of these are the things that you don't even think about because they're so ubiquitous in the United States. People should have an understanding of how those work, like at a high level, not a detailed level, but I'd love to see a class like that.
Well, you know, some of these courses actually said how things work, but if you're talking, for example, about air conditioning, eventually it may occur to you that, you know, when you plug something in the wall, what's going on there, and where's that coming from? And you can work that in to these ideas with almost any subject. You know, that I think it gives you an opportunity to do that. That's not just how things work. I mean, there are books written about how things work. They're cool. I mean, you know, to read. Yes, sir.
I'm teaching a course this semester on energy technology in the honors college professional, but there's only students that register that freshman, and not STEM students. And the challenge is they're interested in the subject and they want to know how things work, but they're not mathematically literate. And the idea is to try to get them to learn like some facts and how things work and what, you know, the basic principles. But it's not about trying to prepare them for the next level course, which is how we were all taught. So we were all taught, you know, we go through these exercises, we do all the problems, because next year we're going to have to do more problems and more difficult problems. And so it's very challenging to find material for the course. I mean, you more or less have to invent it yourself.
Well, I agree. I mean, I've always found that notion daunting. Steve actually is very good at that kind of thing, but it takes a lot of time and effort and thinking, and people have done it. I mean, that's why I tried to say, you know, if there's a course that you see in a list, I would contact the guy or lady and ask them if you could have their, you know, course materials and how they went about this. If this started happening here, then I could only imagine that there would be future sessions where people would stand up and address exactly stand up here and address exactly what you're raising. Sandy?
So I'm a sociologist, so I'm interested in teachers and power. And, you know, in terms of your scenario, I'm intrigued by the science versus engineering. And, you know, what types of difficulties, perhaps pre-existing tensions between science and engineering you would have in integrating engineering into the existing science and environment. So most of the universities, have you integrated them, or do you have a separate department for engineering? And is it, you know, is there a history of tension?
Well, I don't really know. I mean, there's so few that I have to. I think that there's so few not because there's a tension. I think there's so few because there are very few faculty who are willing to invest time and energy in doing it. Of course, haven't been trained to do it and have to think outside the box that they were taught in. I've considered teaching materials in the world kind of course in the Honors College at Osher, at the Osher Institute for Lifelong Learning kind of thing, or in a program like this. I have not generated the energy to sit down and actually do it. I think at this point I could probably do it, but you have to think very differently. Frank?
Yeah, I want to address this issue of how much math you do. Because Sarah and I taught the honors science for non-science majors for a long time and used virtually no math but got quantitative concepts in it. Most people have a naive understanding. You know, if I add more to this side of the equation, some of it will come out on that side of the equation without having to go into the second law of thermodynamics.
Who took this course?
They were non-science majors. It was, and I think recall we had a few science majors in there, and they were incredibly frustrated because the course started with examples and kind of intuitive principles, and the science majors came in and said, you know, why are you doing this? Why don't you just give us the general principle and we'll figure out the application? It was an absolute 180-degree twist, and Sheila Tobias's book actually mentioned that. They're not dumb, they're different. You know, she took PhD students in humanities and stuck them in elementary physics, and they did fine. They were smart people, but their minds worked actually in an opposite direction. And they said, you know, why are you deriving equations for us? Why don't you tell us what happened? Well, to a scientist, equations are how things happen. and I feel your pain of not having mathematical background in doing this. And it is hard because you do think in numbers and you do make things happen in numbers. And the numeracy is a big problem.
What credit, what did students who took your course, what did it satisfy in their curricula?
It was either biological science, physical science, with the lab.
All right, so it was the Gen Ed
It was
science.
a gen ed course.
Okay.
And
All right, so this is going on the campus then, to some
it did.
extent.
It still does in, not my course, but in other courses, yeah. So it's possible you can find these things.
So the life science people are doing some of this.
Well, that was the honors college.
That was in the honors.
That was in the Honors College.
It was in
Okay.
the honors college. But we did have John Adams and I started it, and so John was about as physical a scientist as you could get.
Yes.
Without actually having worked on it.
And it counted for science distribution being an Honors College course that did not go through the course and curriculum process?
We went through the honors college, and
Before I started it.
they could do.
Is that, Steve, is that right?
Well, it originally went through.
Yeah, I think it did.
And then once
I think we
it
taught it.
got approved, it's been on the books that way for 20 years.
So does an Honors College course have to go through some campus?
It originally did in order to get certified for general education, yes.
For general, but it wouldn't have to be in the Honors College, but it wouldn't then count for distribution if it didn't.
Correct.
Right.
Okay.
I don't think getting Gen Ed credit is that hard application-wise to do. So if you have a course, it's not, in my experience, not too hard to get the Gen Ed people.
No, in my experience also, there's a huge list. I mean,
They're pretty open about it.
yeah.
I think you could, I think you would get it approved. I think that wouldn't be the issue. The thing that I think might be even better is, so in our general education, if we want to talk about the Honors College, we have an interdisciplinary series of courses in the arts and humanities. We have an interdisciplinary series in science. We have an interdisciplinary series in the human sciences. But there aren't very many courses that bridge either of those two large groups. And it seems like, what do you want students to be able to do after they take this class? You want them to be able to ask questions like, should we do this? Not, how do we do this? So it seems like the ethical component of the use of technology could be something that's brand new. I saw a couple things that were on the list, but there would certainly be brand new if we do. And really bridging that gap of should we do bioengineering, should we do genetically modified organisms, should we do artificial intelligence? Those are the kinds of questions that go beyond just the
Yes.
engineering and bridge some things that I think are really what you would want the students to get out of the class at the end.
Yeah, the only real example that I gave along those lines was Roland Heck's course at Delaware, where he initiated many discussions of precisely those kinds of topics. So I think probably a lot of the other courses dealt with stuff within them. I mean, I did, as a matter of fact. Yes, sir.
I teach at an undergraduate seminar for chemists, and they're mostly juniors and seniors. And 10 years now, and the students love it. They really like it because there's lots of freedom sort of in the application of science knowledge. But I'm not so sure that you should teach that ethics to people who don't know the science so much, because you should know some science at that time when you make a judgment on whether something is ethically, good or not. And so, in that field, it works because the people actually learn chemistry and then they look at the ethics. But if you teach ethics to people who don't know much about the substance, then I don't know. Is that what you want?
But it's better, I mean, the engineering and the science that gets taught in the course is going to be better than the other 300 million people in the country that are making ethical decisions without anything, right? Without any scientific basis. Okay, maybe not 300 million, but 250 million.
I agree that there's not enough ethics education on campus. It's just in the philosophy department, and that's all there. But there's not big ethics discussions in most other fields.
The Engineering Accrediting Agency, ABET, requires a certain amount of attention to ethics. In my experience, it's pretty perfunctory. But I mean, there's when it comes to to building things and developing things, there's a clear ethical component, and my sense is we can do better. But my sense also is that you don't need to. I mean, humanities students simply aren't going to take the calculus sequence in chemistry and physics so that they can understand in a fundamental way chemistry, advanced chemical content. The best you're going to do is to take examples and explain to them the underlying science and what, if any, and there always are, ethical issues connected with it. I mean, it's the best you can do.
So really, I mean, the best example of that in terms of ethics and not having this, like you said, like you have to have some science behind it for them. Like you can't just have a discussion about ethics and engineering without understanding some of the ethics. Like the best example is the Challenger example, right? With the design flaw, it wasn't a design flaw with the O-rings failing. It was a temperature issue, and all the engineers knew that, and they had the reports in place. So everybody knew that if you launched below a certain temperature, that it was going to fail. But it was politically motivated, and they said, we've got to launch right now, and they launched, and that's a huge ethical statement. But without having that, like you can't have an ethics discussion in engineering without having some knowledge to back it up. So I would think that a standalone like ethics and engineering course that doesn't like explain how things work is going to be not useful in the way that we would like it to be useful.
I think you always have to go first to the people who want to be the professionals in the field, and then propagate.
Yes, he told me. I just remembered. He told me to put the microphone near people talking. So I'm stalking you because I've.
I disagree with you there. Your example shows I don't know any engineering. Cold, brittle, explode. That I don't need an engineering class to understand that ethics.
No, but
So
the point was they didn't know that, so they couldn't make an ethical decision.
well, but what engineering does it take to understand that? That some people knew that and others ignored it. To the point where that's why I wanted to say something about the having enough background to understand the science or the engineering that we are trying to teach to non-majors is. I think one problem is that when we teach in our area of main expertise, we have lost the ability to not think in these details and not to understand it the way how we understand it. We think people have to understand these basics under that before you can understand what it does. So, say, cell biologists think you need to understand what the peptide bond looks like in a protein and what the interactions of the different charges and that in there to understand what a protein does in a cell. As an evolutionary biologist, I don't know how a peptide bond looks, but I have an idea about how a protein works and how it functions and how it influences the cell. So I think that actually we are often teaching the things better that we are not the experts in, but where we are like the second learners
think
from,
that's
or that. And because we can't stand back to that, that's why we have to go back and now we have to understand the equations of population genetics before we can even think about teaching evolution. But we don't need that. We can explain it in a better way. So this standing back from that and putting things into bigger concepts and that rather in the details, and that is the issue with that. I think it would be much easier to do this not really in our area, but somewhere in the peripheral area, the teaching in that, and really where that detailed knowledge is ultimately required for evolution. What I teach is for maybe 3% of my students who go on to graduate school in a field like this, but everyone who goes to med school or any other health-related field or sells real estate otherwise needs a very different level of understanding of science, of scientific process, of how cells work and all of that. And so maybe that is really the challenge for us, is where do we want to teach the non-majors, and what field should we pick for that?
Another way to get student interest, I think, is to discuss the issue but have some outcome. So for engineering issues on this campus, we could ask, for example, one of my pet peeves is all the main entryways that have stairs, not accessible. You have to use a back door to do that. Well, should the campus make all main entrances accessible? That's an engineering problem, requires money, ethical decisions to be made. You could have a class empowered, they're going to make that decision. At the end of the semester, they're going to learn enough about all those issues to decide it's worth the money, worth it someplace else, or it's not. Or bathrooms, redoing all the bathrooms, is that worth the money or not? And you can think of, I think, countless different kinds of those kind of questions. You could empower the students to take a class, the classes to do that.
So you're envisioning a PBL type approach.
Right? And they would be taught by different professors but it would engage the students. In fact, you'd have them go out to ask for advice from other professors, right?
And whatnot. So how can we make that happen so that they actually get empowered to make decisions?
That requires administration, of course. And that's one of your that's the big elephant in the room, was the administration buy-in in lots of different levels. But this way, it would be you could self-administration as a cost-effective way to make the decision. It's a way to empower students, so it's good PR for students to come to Missouri. Not only going to learn things in Missouri, you're going to affect campus before you leave, right? So that might appeal to administrators to do that.
Yeah,
And it would involve faculty being more cross-disciplinary, get out of our little silos. I mean, we all have a hard time finding the time to talk to somebody else. That's going to impact our campus, too. We're going to be much more willing to say, well, I think this is not a good idea, and here's why, and I explain it to you, that kind of stuff.
So, Aaron, how many of these courses used Henry Petrosky's books as the starting point?
I don't really know. I know that Sheila had a discussion quite recently with Mr. Petrosky, Dr. Petrosky, who's retired now and older, and he basically said, "Good luck." You know, I mean, he knows politically, academic politics are stacked against this kind of an initiative. But I'm sure some of the courses must use his books. Yes.
Are there courses for non-majors at these other institutions that are actual engineering courses for non-majors, in the sense that my daughter is taking an engineering course in high school right now, and it doesn't require any math or science beyond what a high school student has, but they're actually learning to think as engineers.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about engineering in society. It's not about ethics. It's actually learning to think like an engineer. How do we build things? What are the principles? How do we apply what math and physics we know?
Is she now interested in becoming an engineer?
Yeah, that's why she's taking the course.
Yeah,
I
you see,
wondered, are there courses like that at universities that are really teaching engineering for people who aren't trying to become an engineer, but that would satisfy physical science requirements?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. But what I do know is that most of NSF Education Directorate's money along the lines of engineering are to recruit STEM students, you know, and to encourage STEM students. I mean, there's a lot that's where millions and millions of dollars have gone into trying to convince kids that engineering and science is a good career because the country needs them. You know, I mean, you can look at the engineering faculty and see the how many are American-born, and you'll see that there simply isn't the staff simply isn't there. And what I'm talking about today, of course, had nothing to do with recruiting. It assumes that it's dealing with the clientele who have definitely decided they're not going to be engineers, you know. So I'm not really sure how to answer your question. It sounds like a cool course. Well, it's obviously worked.
I'm just thinking that I think you can teach people, give them exposure to how to think like an engineer, even if they don't have college science.
Well,
that's actually engaging.
yeah, I think this whole list of examples of courses demonstrates that you can do this if you know how. I mean, if the science educators can help us do that and break out of our professionally trained boxes, which is hard. So what do you think, Marcel?
So one of your barriers is administration buy-in and teaching time, right?
Yes.
So, NSF grants now require, 10% of the budget on broader impact. What if campus said, each of the professional colleges, 10% of your teaching effort has to be broader impact, teaching these kind of level courses for gen ed majors, and it has to be gen ed, and that would be the incentive to have your department, your school, for gen ed. Just make it a across-the-board requirement for every school, and because it's equally important to know law stuff and everything else.
Well, you know, I mean, that's the answer to the Maiden's Prayer, but I mean, a lot of people thought I was very involved with the campus writing program for a number of years, and a lot of people thought, this can't work because every department has to teach writing intensive, and nobody wants to teach this. All you needed was one person in each department who was willing to do it, and then you run this course where 30,000 students are taking 2 WI courses. You don't need a lot of people to do this. What you need is 1 or 2 here and there who are supported in the effort. That's what you need. So I'm certainly not advocating, I don't even want most faculty to get anywhere near this stuff. I just want the ones who are interested and think they have some ideas. I like your idea.
Something that hasn't come out, I think, is the fact that some students just have an interest. We talk a lot about what the outcome is, that the student needs to learn this or needs to learn that or will benefit in some way. But some people are just curious and would be happy to take a course and learn something. And so these kinds of courses can be really nice for that type of student that just, has no particular desire to use this in any way in their future, but just is curious and would like to know something.
So should the curriculum have room? In engineering, there's less and less opportunity to take something because they're interested in it. It's so prescribed or proscribed.
But outside of engineering, it's not quite so prescribed.
But I gave a
Yeah.
talk in a
Okay.
small college recently, a physics talk, and I'm a physicist, a technical talk. And then a student came after the talk that had attended the talk and introduced herself, and she told me, well, I'm a philosophy student, but I just like to come to physics colloquia because they're interesting. There are such students.
Well, there's one anyway. No, I'm sure you're right.
I have a son.
Professor Glaser.
Middle school last year, and he participated in middle school science Olympiad. And one of the projects that he was involved in was bridge building with very thin wood. So the bridge would weigh like 10 grams and would be able to carry like 20 pounds or more. I have never seen him so engaged in anything for months and months, he's optimized his system, and then he won medals all over the place in the state. And he was really into it, and I thought for a second, Jesus, he might not be a scientist, he might be an engineer.
So you broke his bridge.
I'm fine with that. But all I'm saying is, I believe this also about young people and science. They're extremely interested in it. And if they're not interested in it once they come to college, it's not so much their problem, it's really faculty problem. Because we're just not teaching them in an exciting enough way. This is the same with science, I think. You know, if you look at the first 2 years in chemistry, for example, it is not appealing. So well, you know, there are some highlights that are appealing, but I think this is really the problem, that, you know, we're not doing enough of an effort to make it appealing when the students are still young.
Well, I think a number, and because I didn't want to talk about this course and then that course, but a number of the courses that are on your list there do have projects and labs associated with them, as a matter of fact. And there is more project-based teaching going on in these things than I implied, I think.
Well, I hate to cause this to end, but it's 1 o'clock and I know
It's okay.
people have got
No,
to
it's
make
okay.
breakfast. So our winner today is David Singh of our book, which we'll get to you because we don't have one right now. But
Who won? He won. He won the physics.
yeah, a book, an education book. We will get you one. Perfect. And thank you so much. This has been
It was my pleasure.
How are you?
I'm good. See you.
See you.
This is. I got roped into this after about 1,000 emails with Sheila about. It's just an intriguing idea, and it makes a lot of sense. And then of course, the logical thing then is, she wanted me to teach something, but I just wasn't prepared to spend 500 hours doing it. And yet, it would be really interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting.
To do, but there's institutional issues.
I agree with you.
Our dean is, I wrote her when I was going to the workshop, I wanted to chat about it, she didn't answer. I sent her a notice of this talk, she didn't even acknowledge it. I sent it to Hani as well, and he didn't acknowledge it. So it's just not, it's not how she's how she sees herself being judged. And thank you very much for coming. Well, good. That was. It is fun.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So there's not a lot of, where we are as a college, we're just not.